Can you hear me? Is it coming through? Oh dear. Oh dear. Okay. Good morning. Can you hear me fine? Good afternoon, rather. Is that better? Is it coming through more directly or still delayed? Hello, folks. Just checking the sound. We've got a few technicalities we're dealing with, so I'm just checking sound here again. So I need just some confirmation if it's coming through to you. Oh, there's no sound. All righty, folks. We can now get started. Um, you may not be aware of it, but there would appear to be a little bit of a delay. So when I speak to you, it's not coming through necessarily directly. By the time you hear it, I will maybe be moving on to another slide. So I'm going to need a little bit of feedback from you guys and girls as we go, so that you can tell me, whoa, ma'am, slow down, because we haven't quite got there yet. I'll try and give time on each slide long enough for you to the talking part catch up with it. As you've realized, you've got your Q&As, and your Q&A can allow you to ask questions. I would request, though, that we try and keep questions for the end of a section. So let's look at Learning Unit 1, and then let's take questions for Learning Unit 1 at the end of Learning Unit 1. That will just allow me then to be able to catch up with questions, because I'm just one person and I'm looking at your questions and I'm trying to illustrate what is important for the test. What I also just want you to be aware of is that what we're doing now is really just a checklist. It's looking at what you must absolutely know, what you've got to be sure that is in your heads before you go into test 1, and then also an idea of some of the questions in the past that we've asked on these particular sections. That does not guarantee that these will be the questions that will be asked in the test. I have no idea what is in the test. You will see it before I do. And so we need to make sure that you have a broad enough knowledge to be able to deal with anything that comes in that test. All right, so that's the idea here as a summary of what is absolutely critical for your test 1. Having a look at, let's just get you in here so in the right place. Your coverage for test 1, remember, Learning Unit 1, Learning Unit 2, Learning Unit 3, and then pay careful attention to the chapters that are covered, because it's chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 in your textbook. That includes demand and supply. So please, whatever you do, don't go and forget to study chapter 4. Absolutely critical for test 1. Your outcomes, your learning outcomes are pretty useful, once again, as a checklist. Your assessor, the person who sets the test, which is not us, it's not your lecturers that set the tests. They come from the IIE, which is the Independent Institute of Education. And the people who are setting the tests will always look at the outcomes. So they are required to make sure that whatever they're asking you fits into those outcomes. Therefore, they can be a useful checklist for you when you want to be absolutely sure that you've covered whatever will be required for this test. Also remember, there's only 3 learning units, which is actually a very small volume at this stage, which means that the better you learn them, the better prepared you'll be for this test, and then also the more likely that information is to be retained by you at the end of the semester when you have to write on all your learning units in the final exam. All right, so I'm just delaying a moment or two now for you all to catch up. Right, let's move on. There we go. So Learning Unit 1, we're going to take a tour through Learning Unit 1 now and have a look at what is critical. A lot of theory here, so a lot of stuff that you just learn is going to stand you in good stead. And then you've got your PPC, of course, your one graph, your first introduction to your microeconomic graphs, which we need to make sure that you're comfortable with. So we'll try and make sure that you've got that down pat, as they say, and then we'll have a look at potentially some very simple questions that could be asked. All right, so it seems we delay with slides, so we're actually okay, so I don't need to be too slow. Now, let's put this up, and then I want to ask you now to pop into your Q&A. I may not be able to see all of you because it could be a bit hectic. There's quite a few of you online. But to pop into your Q&A and say, what are we talking about? If we're looking at cornerstones, key concepts, we can illustrate these concepts with the PPC. Give me an idea of what I'm talking about here, just by popping it into your Q&A. Just waiting to see if anything comes across. All right, no response. Ah, there we go. There's a bit of a delay with those coming through too, I can see. There we go. Oh, thank you for one of the, yes, you're correct. Let's first answer the question. Scarcity, choice, opportunity, cost. Absolutely well done. I'm just looking at one of our messages. There may be students struggling with the link. Is there a code and an ID for this meeting? No, there shouldn't be. The link is what get them through. It may be their ability to get onto Microsoft Teams might be their issue. But there was, as far as I'm aware, there was just the link. There was no code, and we didn't give any IDs. All right. So just tell them it might be that they need to just go with, I think it says, do you want to continue on this browser? And if they use that access, that should get them through fine. But I would also ask to all of you who know of anybody that is struggling with a link onto Teams, it's really important that even if they miss this, this will be recorded and the recorded link will be distributed. So that may only be on Monday, which is a bit of a nuisance, but they are or must send through a query through to the IT department at some point because we need to get this resolved. The IT people need to tell us what is the problem, and they need to make sure that if there are students who are battling with this Teams situation, that they are made aware of it. So if you can just encourage any of your friends who you know may be struggling and don't succeed in getting through, that they make sure they let their college know that that is the case, particularly the IT department, and this must be resolved before we get to, say, test two and also the final exam. Apologies for that. I don't know what it would be, but I do know that I've had trouble before getting onto Teams, and it takes a few tries sometimes to get it right. So it may be worth them getting out and then going in and trying again to access the link. All right, so back to our syllabus. Yes, you were right. It's scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost. And of course, that is what we're going to go and have a look at now so that we can make sure that you are comfortable with each of them. And really important, folks, that you make sure that you are able to describe each of these. Scarcity, what is it? Choice, can you give me a description? Opportunity cost, can you give me a description? Opportunity cost is the most obvious one because you get given a definition. Scarcity and choice, a little bit more challenging. Remember, when you're looking at scarcity, you're looking at limited resources, and that gives rise to limited goods and services. And then choice is just the choice that communities or individuals actually make about what goods they want to produce and then how are we going to produce them. All right, so fairly easy to describe, but you need to be accurate to get those marks in the test. We're going to look at the relationship between these three concepts. Let's take a look. Your scarcity is your limited resources, limited goods and services. And then that leads us automatically to making choices because our resources individually, nationally, i.e. in the country, in the continent, in the globe, are all limited. We have a scarcity problem. Everybody has a scarcity problem. And it doesn't matter how rich or how poor you are, you all experience scarcity problems. And that forces us all to make choices. We're making choices all the time. We know that. And every single time we make a choice, we are incurring an opportunity cost. And of course, then we need to be able to go and describe very specifically what is an opportunity cost. Now, remember, it doesn't necessarily have to be in money terms. So don't always think of opportunity cost in money terms. Think of it as what we give up, what we sacrifice when we make a choice. And that could simply be another choice that we are sacrificing. So do be sure that you've understood that correctly. One of the places we find that students often get a little bit confused and misled in their questions is with opportunity cost. Sometimes we can put a number, a value on it. Sometimes we can't. It depends on how you are given the information. Another few concepts that you need to be sure, can you differentiate between wants, needs, demand, and then just making sure that you've understood how this is different to something that you might have had in mind. If we just asked you, what do you think are wants, and what would you have said to me versus what we need you to know? Just be sure that you've got that additional information. Our brains are sometimes a little bit stubborn, and they stick with what we're comfortable with, what we've known for a long time. And then we have to get that brain up to date so that it knows what is required potentially in this particular module, or right for that particular concept. That's your wants, your needs. Pretty easy to differentiate between. But then demand, please watch out. Demand has two important parts to it, and that is the ability and the willingness. So when we talk demand, we've got to remember we've got to be able to pay for that good that we want for it to be demand, and we've also got to be willing to pay for it. So both important concepts when you're looking at demand. We're going to look for that. If we ask you about demand, we're going to be looking for that. It doesn't have to be those specific words, but it has to tell us the same story. So for example, ability might be purchasing power. You have the purchasing power, and then the willingness is you're happy to pay for that item that you're going to demand. Remember your resources in economics. Whenever we talk about resources, we are referring to your factors of production. This is obvious to many of you who've studied economics before, but for those of you who have not, this can be a little bit difficult to remember. You've got resources in all your other modules as well, and you maybe had resources with what you were studying previously. Now you must be sure that when we are in economics and we're talking resources, we are talking land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. All right. So really important for you to keep reminding yourself of that, just in case it's not sticking in your mind automatically. We'll look more at these in detail. As I said to you here, study in detail in chapter 3 in the textbook. It is in chapter 3 that these come up in with all the additional information. You need to be comfortable with that because they could ask you questions on land or labor, capital, entrepreneurship, which are hidden in that information in chapter 3. And now we get to our PPC. So before we go on to the PPC, of which there is bound to be a question in test 1, I want to make sure that everybody is hearing me fine, that everybody who is on board is able to see the screen, and that you are able to kind of follow what I'm doing. I'm not going too fast, I'm not going too slow, and you're receiving the information adequately. So if you can just give me a thumbs up or a yes or whatever, just so that I can see that we're all on track before I get into this super important little section. Great. Looks like it's all working all right. You are getting it. Yep, brilliant. Okie dokes. So we can move on. It seems as though it's running relatively smoothly. Please, you must be able to define your PPC. There is a lot of help in understanding the PPC by knowing that definition, because you can keep reminding yourself, what is the PPC? So look, it is going to show, it is a graph. First of all, it's a tool or a graph that is going to show us the combination of the goods that we can produce with the resources we have available. So imagine yourself as a little bit of a little small economy. You've got land, you've got labor, you've got capital, you've got entrepreneurship, and now you're going to produce goods. We can only deal with 2 at a time because our graph only has 2 axes. So one product is going to be on the one axis and another product on the other axis. That's why we've got a combination of any 2 goods or services that we want to produce. And then the really important part is what's underlined on the screen. That is that resources are fully and efficiently employed. It is telling us that we are using all of our land, our labor, our capital, our entrepreneurship to the best of our ability. And that takes us back to the actual name. That is why it's called production possibilities, because it is what we can do with the resources we have available. And I think if you remember it in that way, you should not struggle to answer the questions that they ask on it. All right. Just bear in mind that it can have other names as well. We've got the PPF and the transformation curve. So both of those are alternative names. PPF is production possibility frontier, and then transformation curve, kind of self-explanatory there. The reason that we use that word sometimes transformation curve is that we take the resources from producing one good, let's say we were using it to grow potatoes, for example, and we now want to produce more of another product, say beef. We're going to take the resources, the land, the labor, the capital, the entrepreneurship that we were using in the production of potatoes, and we're going to now go and use that in the production of beef. So we are transforming those resources from one kind of production to another kind of production. All right. So that's where the name transformation comes from. Just going back. There we go. You must be able to draw the graph. Please make sure that you all can draw the graph. You must be able to label the axes correctly. And then you must be able to identify all the different points: efficient, inefficient, attainable, unattainable. And then also make sure you can use the graph to explain scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost. We're going to go and give you a little scenario type of question they could ask. Look, there's a lot of different types of questions they can ask on the PPC. I've chosen one particular way to deal with it, just because this is the most common way, but it does not have to be the only way. They can give you the information for the PPC, as I'm going to do in a moment, or they can give it to you in a table and ask you to draw the PPC from that information, or they can give you an actual PPC and then ask you a whole bunch of questions on that actual PPC. All right, so a lot of different ways. We're going to look at one particular way that we want to deal with this for now. So there's your little resource. You can, if you've got pencil and paper close by, you can go in now and see, would you be able to draw this PPC? Very simple, very straightforward. Just listen to the instructions. So using all its resources, an economy produces either 2,000 kgs of potatoes or 1,000 kgs of beef per month. Identify at least one point that is efficient and attainable on your graph. Note, potatoes on the y-axis and beef on the x-axis. All right, so take a moment. I'm going to give wait for a moment or two, see if you can draw your graph quickly, what you think it should look like, and then we're going to go on to the slide that will show you what it should look like. So giving you a moment or two to do that. All righty, hopefully you've done it, and we can go and have a look. Let's go see. There you have it. So there we have our potatoes on our y-axis, as it told us. The best we can do with potatoes is 2,000 kilograms. There we have our beef on the x-axis. The best we can do with our beef is 1,000. We join those 2 points together. Notice it is not a straight line, so watch out for that. Your PPC should not be a straight line. Really important for you to make sure you don't put a straight line there, because you may lose marks. And then point A, we had to identify a point that was attainable and efficient. And of course, all of the points that are on the actual PPC are all attainable and efficient. So any point from that intercept there on that axis all the way down to the intercept here on this axis, that little line should touch on the axis. Apologies there, I didn't notice that. Should be on your axis. All of those points are efficient and attainable. Let's go and have a look at some of the other different points that we've got to know. So I'm going to have a slightly different graph for you now that will show you all of the different points. Let's go take a look. There we go. So now we have pillows we're producing with all of our resources, with our land, our labor, our capital, our entrepreneurship. We've got two products that we're producing. We're producing pillows and blankets. We've got our PPC. We've got all of those points on the PPC, all of which are attainable and efficient. But now we've got to go and identify some of those other points. So we want to have a look and see which point is unattainable in this particular case. And of course, an unattainable point is something that is outside of the PPC. So that would be your point G. We can't get there. We don't have the resources. All right. So we've got to be able to explain why is it unattainable and then where it's going to be. It's going to be outside of the PPC. We can't get there. Any point inside the PPC, any point inside here is going to be attainable. Yeah, we can get there, but it is inefficient. Because why would we want to produce at point H, for example, when we could have so much more at E or D or C? It doesn't make sense to be stuck there at point H, which means that that's also unemployment. We are not using all of our land, our labor, our capital, our entrepreneurship. So in effect, we have unemployment in all of those factors of production. Simple, straightforward, ladies and gents, just don't mix them up. All right, be very clear for yourself what are the rules, and then you should be absolutely fine with the questions that they ask you. And then, of course, as I say here right at the top, it can be used to illustrate scarcity, choice, opportunity cost, is making sure that you are able to use it to do that. Your scarcity is the PPC itself. You cannot produce more than what is represented in that graph, and that is scarcity. That is because you've got scarce resources. You only have enough resources to be able to produce that amount of goods and services. And of course, now we can give it a number. If we used all of our resources to produce only pillows, the best we can do is 50. If we use all of our resources to produce only blankets, the best we can do is 5 blankets. That's our scarcity situation. And of course, when we join those two together, any combination of those two products is achievable as long as it's on that line. So it can't go outside of that line. So for example, if we had to go to G, we cannot produce 5 blankets and what would this be, maybe 12 pillows at the same time, because it's outside of our capacity or possibilities based on the resources that we have available. All right. So hopefully you're able to see all of those things, ladies and gents. And then if there are any queries at any point, you can pop through a question when we get to the end, and we can always zip back to the slide if necessary and have a look. Then the next thing that they can ask you is this: what if economic resources increase? Example, skilled immigration. We've got more resources now. So the question would be, how would we illustrate this on our graph, or how would we explain it if necessary? We'll look at that in a moment. Another question they could ask: illustrate or show or explain an improvement in the production techniques of only one sector. And then they could ask you about economic growth, and then they could ask you about unemployment. And of course, you've now got to be able to deal with each of these. So let's go back to the first one. Economic resources increase. They don't specify in this case that it's only in one product. They specify one resource, yes. But if our PPC is based on the resources that we have, if we now have more resources, there's only one thing that can happen to that PPC. It has to shift outward or to the right. And of course, that is much the same as economic growth. So those two, that first one and economic growth, would be represented in the same way. Both of them would show our PPC shifting to the right or outward, and it would indicate to us that we can produce more of both goods. Be careful there, look at your mark allocation. What are they expecting you to do? And have they told you to draw the graph, or have they just told you to explain the situation? The one that confuses students a lot is the improvement in the production techniques of only one sector. And that is because you forget that now it's only one product that has changed. The other product remains the same. So if you are looking at your axes, you are only going to show a change on one of the axes, not both. Always pay attention to which product it is, and then you should be able to get that one clear. And of course, an increase would swivel out, and a decrease would swivel in. I think I've got something to show you in a moment on that one. And then we go to unemployment. And then just remember with unemployment, there's no moving the graph. All right. Your unemployment is just inside of your graph, a point inside of that particular PPC that you draw. And that's why I put it here on the screen, because often students now get confused with unemployment. They want to then go moving their PPC. Nope, you don't move your PPC. You just show a point inside. All right. Here you go. I've shown you the difference here. This one with the potatoes and beef for the shift. The shift is going to show that there's an increase in both the sectors. So that would be your increase in resources or economic growth. I call that a shift because that makes us not get confused. And then on the other side, you've got what we call a swivel, which is showing an increase in only one of the products or one of the sectors. All right, so two little examples that they could ask you to deal with, as I say, not necessarily with a graph, but it could be them asking you to explain the difference between these two situations, in which case I would use shift and swivel, because you're going to get that right. And then also remind us to remember to tell us on both axes or on only one axis. Notice when you do your swivel that your other product remains the same. Don't have a gap there, because as soon as you have a gap at that starting point, you're showing me a shift. You're not showing me a swivel. So be very, very careful that your point is at the exact starting point of the original PPC. So that was our shifts and our swivels to answer some of those questions, which are, as I say to you, you're going to get a question of some sort on the PPC. We just don't know what it is or how many marks it will be for. But do please be very comfortable with it, because often it is the saving question in a test, because students really can answer it well. And sometimes it's for quite a few marks, and then they're able to get quite a few marks from that question. Then we go back to the pure theory, which you don't really need much help from me to study. This is stuff you've just got to memorize, but just focus on memorizing the correct terms so that you recognize or are able to give us back the correct terminology, which allows us to be able to give you the marks. All right. Sometimes you're explaining the concept, but we're not convinced yet that you really know it because you're not using the correct terminology. Becomes really important to use the right words. As one of my students said to me, to talk the lingo so that we can see that you actually understand your economic theory. And of course, you must be able to tell us why it is a social science. Economics is a science, it is a social science. You must be able to add in that the laws are not exact, that they are conditional. Be able to give us an example. What do we mean by a conditional law? Remember your natural sciences, which are your physics and your chemistry, for example, they have exact laws. Whereas economics, although it is a science, it is a social science, and it has conditional laws. And of course, that's where the word ceteris paribus comes from, because we've got to say conditional on all other things remaining the same. And to say that nice and easily, we use ceteris paribus. You don't have to use ceteris paribus, but you may well have to state all other things remaining the same. All right, I'm sure your lecturers have all told you that many times. Then we also must remember that even though economics is a social science, it is still an empirical science, and that means it can be measured. You see what I mean about terminology? Know the words, all right? More important concepts you must understand and learn. You've got to know these, ladies and gents. They're going to ask a question at least on one or two of these. Are you able to tell the difference between micro and macro? Remember, it's not big and small. All right, big and small is going to take you down the wrong road. You want to look at individual and aggregates, much safer for looking at the difference between micro and macro. Positive and normative, I think that one's fairly straightforward for most students. Most of you seem to get it right. Your stocks and flows, which is actually from chapter 3. It's learning unit 2, of course, not really learning unit 1. But I stuck it in here because it's just as important, and it's going to come up again a bit later. And then you've got rates and levels. Remember here you've got calculations. We're going to have a look at one or two quickly now. And then you've got correlation and causation. Be sure that you know the difference between your correlation, which is simply moving in the same direction, or moving at the same time would be a better description. Whereas causation is, does the change in the one variable cause the change in the other variable? And we've got to be very careful with causation. Correlation is much more obvious to most of us. Causation usually needs some sort of investigation to prove that there is some causality, as we say in economics. So NB, learning, 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 folks. That's what that is. Here I've given you a little bit of a practice, so now you can go to your Q&As again, and you can tell me. I'll wait a moment or two. Looking at whether they're micro or macro. So let's go for maize farmers in the Free State. So if you had to tell me maize farmers in the Free State, microeconomics or macroeconomics? Let's see what you say. Yes, looking good, ladies and gents. You correctly identified microeconomics, those who've come through. Well done. Just double checking. Yep, all of you, well done. So somebody's even given me all three, which was actually, let's have a look. Micro. Yep, absolutely. So our user who gave me all three answers, you are correct. So well done. I'm just going to just tell you that I saw there was somebody who asked me to slow down a little while back. I'm assuming that was at the PPC. Don't stress. What we can do is we can go back and when I get to the end of Learning Unit 1, let's just check. If you've got a specific question, meanwhile, just type in on your Q&A what it was that you were a little bit confused with. We can go back quickly, then have a look at it before I move on to Learning Unit 2. All right. So just put your confusion in there. But microeconomics, you're looking good, ladies and gents. So let's go and have a look. Since a student has already given me the correct answers, I'm going to just check that you're all comfortable. The production of Toyota vehicles in South Africa, also micro, correct, because it's only one industry. It's in fact only one firm, actually. Looking at, even though it's a big firm, it's only one. You can see where individual versus big or small is going to keep you on track. So it's an individual firm. And then an increase in government spending. You can see straight away that that's a much more a general topic. In other words, we're looking at all the aggregate of government spending in the economy. So therefore, that is going to be a macroeconomic issue. So micro with an I, micro with an I, and the last one, macro with an A. Correct. Well done, those of you who identified that correctly. Now let's have a look at something else. Check you. Positive or normative. So once again, you can put all three answers in if you like. Let's go and see whether you are, and you can put just P for positive and N for normative. You don't have to write out the words in full for each of those three statements. See if you can work out what they are. Well done, students. All right, shame. I see some of you are a little bit stuck still on micro and macro. So hopefully you've picked up my little commentary on the micro and macro. And now we were on positive or normative. So some of you might be experiencing a bit of a delay in the sound coming through. Unfortunately, that's not from my side. I think that's to do with the connections that you have specifically where you are. But apologies for that. All right, back to our positive or normative. Looking at you, most of you got it correct. So the first one, VAT should be increased, definitely normative. Yep, you're correct. The second one, a decrease in supply will decrease the equilibrium price of a good. That is positive because we can go and prove. We can show that a decrease in supply will decrease the equilibrium price or it won't decrease the equilibrium price. Remember, positive does not have to be correct. So in other words, that is an incorrect statement, but we can go and prove that it is incorrect. And we can show that a decrease in supply will, in fact, increase the equilibrium price of a good. That is something that you would have maybe learned in class already. Positive does not have to be correct, all right? It just has to be able to be proved true or false, i.e. correct or incorrect. So second statement, definitely positive statement. And then your third statement, investment spending in South Africa has decreased. Once again, a positive statement, which in this case is a correct statement, and we could go and collect the information to prove that. All right. So, folks, just remember that your positive does not have to be a correct statement. It just has to be able to be proved. Whereas your normative is usually something debatable. It is something that we could talk about and see, should we be doing this or shouldn't we be doing this? And there's quite a lot of subjective valuation that comes in with your normative. And of course, the first statement is exactly that, all right. It would be different if I had have said that it has been increased. So if I said to you that has been increased, that would have then turned that statement into a positive statement. But as it stands, that is very definitely a normative statement. So well done, those of you who got that. I see a student ask me if I could go back. I can't go back right now, but what we will do is we will take a short break. And when we take that break, then I can go back and I won't give you the whole lecture. I can't redo the lecture. Unfortunately, that is the way that this works. But I can just let you look at each of the slides and quickly take you through what we had done up until then. All right. Ladies and gents, this one's super important. Invariably, there's a question on levels and rates. Now, levels and rates can be any numbers. So we can give you any two numbers and we can ask you to go and differentiate or explain the difference or illustrate by calculations the difference between a level and a rate. So there we have a consumer price index, measures the level of prices in the country, which is why they choose this as an example. And we can say to you, for example, the CPI in 2018 was 122, and for 2019 it was 128. And then we can ask you to use that information to show us a change in the level and then a change in the rate of change between those two numbers. All right, so let's look first at the level. What is the difference in the level of CPI for these 2 years? And that is simply the difference between those two numbers. So you would just say 128 minus 122, and you would tell us what that is, but be specific, all right? You've got to tell us 6. Yeah, we can see that's the difference. 128 minus 122 is 6. But now you've got to give us what it is, 6 what? And in this case, it is 6 index points, all right? And then we go and calculate the rate of change. And now the rate of change is a percentage change. And now I give you the little formula, new minus old, divide by old, times by 100. And that is what you would use now to calculate the percentage. So the numbers that we would put in there would be 128 minus 122 is your new minus old, divide by your old, which is 122. And that would you times your answer by 100, and that would give you the answer in this case, which is 4.9%. Please do make sure you can do those calculations, particularly that rate of change calculations. A lot of students do struggle with that for some reason. I'm not sure why. They get the idea, they understand what they're doing, but somehow they don't get the correct answer. So you want to make sure that you go and practice it. All right. I'm going to give you another example, which you can just practice quickly with now. So let's go and show you. And I'll give you a moment or two to try, and then I'll give you the answers. So there's your example. John's salary increases from 18,000 per month to 21,000 per month. Calculate the difference in the level of John's salary, and then calculate the rate of change in his salary. I'm going to ask you, you don't have to put it into the Q&A. I'm just asking you to do it at home on your own, and then you can check your answers. Going to give you a minute to do that. Alrighty, let's go see what the answers should be and if you got them right. Oh, sorry, this thing is so sensitive. There you go. Difference in the level of John's salary. We're looking at the difference between 21,000 and 18,000, 3,000 Rand per month. Easy calculation, simply a subtraction sum, and then calculate the rate of change in his salary, remembering how to do that. New minus old, divide by old, times by 100. Alrighty, so I think this takes us to the end of Learning Unit 1. We need to move a little bit quicker because we've got to get through Learning Unit 2, and then we've only got another hour, and I must spend some time on demand and supply because that is absolutely critical. So we're probably going to race through Learning Unit 1. We'll do a little bit before the break, and then we'll take a break and then do the rest afterwards. All right. But just looking at some questions quickly for Learning Unit 1. Example of MCQs from this section. And economics is concerned with the efficient management of. Have a look quickly and see. I'll tell you the answer in a moment, but see whether you would be able to select the correct answer from that. Giving you a moment to read it. I'm hoping that all of you would have chosen C. That's the only one that can work there. Scarce resources for production. So economics is concerned with the efficient management of scarce resources for production. Remember, that's your key, one of your key concepts that we've got to bear in mind for economics. And then out of these ones, which I'm fairly sure most of you should be able to identify because you were able to deal with the statements I gave you, which one of the following is not part of macroeconomics? Well done. I see you popped in your answer there. Well done. You're absolutely correct. The only one that is not macroeconomics is our price of bread in South Africa. So well done, ladies and gents. We can rest assured that some of you have got this part. All right. So well done for that. All right, that takes us on to Learning Unit 2. Remember, Learning Unit 2 is Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. So I said to you at the end of Learning Unit 1, but I'll rather go back in the break. So during the break, I can go back to some of the earlier slides, and we'll look again at Learning Unit 1, because I don't mind. And then after the break, we'll come back and obviously deal with Chapters 2 and 3. Now, a warning for this section, folks. There's a lot of memorizing here. All right. There's nothing we can do about it. It's a lot of theory. and theory has to be memorized because they're going to ask you a few questions, particularly from chapter 2. But sometimes the questions are for 10 marks, sometimes the questions are for 2 marks. So there's a lot of work in this chapter 2, not so much chapter 3, because that's more understanding, but chapter 2 requires a lot of learning, which you simply have to do. So I'm advising you to study smart here. Try and make sure that you know a little bit about a lot, because then you're going to be able to deal with anything they ask you. If you try and focus like on only one section, so for example, in economic systems, if you just go and study traditional or you just study command, you're going to get yourself into trouble because you're going to have to know a little bit about each. So please do be sure that you do try and study smart in that chapter and know as much as you can and memorize as much of the key concepts as you are able to do so. Chapter 3, a little bit more application based. So I think that won't be too much of a problem for you to memorize. But chapter 2, a little bit more challenging. Remember, both of those chapters are in the same learning unit. So we're not changing learning units when we look at chapter 3. We're still in learning unit 2. The section starts off, if you look at chapter 2 in your textbook, it starts off with the 3 main questions, the 3 main economic questions. And that is what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. And then we've got to be able to describe very briefly what each of these questions cover. So what I do is I do that first, and then we go into our economic systems. So I'm going to look quickly at the questions, and then we'll go on break, all right? So looking at the first question, what to produce. What to produce deals just with the different types of goods in an economy. What is available in an economy? Consumer goods, capital goods. Can you tell the difference? If they asked you that, would you be able to identify consumer goods? That's usually an easy one because most of us are familiar with consumer goods. The problem one for you is going to be capital goods. And remember, money is never a capital good, all right? So money cannot come under capital goods. Money is not a factor of production at all. We treat it very differently in economics, so be careful. Make sure you can describe your capital goods. That's going to be your headache if they ask you. Then you've got all of these that you've got to just be able to distinguish or differentiate between. So what I've done is I've given you key words that you can look at when you are studying this. That will help make it easy to remember. If you try and go and learn long sentences off by heart, it's just going to be an impossible task for you. So much better to go in and just be able to see, okay, what's important about private goods? What's important about public goods? And then the same with economic goods and free goods and homogeneous and heterogeneous. And then be sure you can give examples in each case. It's all there in your textbooks. So you've got the information, and I'm sure your lecturers have been with it, through it with you as well. But what happens is because there's a lot of information, students struggle to memorize it. So that's why I keep your studying smart, all right? I keep it simple. And then remember also your final and intermediate goods. Are you able to distinguish between those different types of goods? Looking at moving on to the next one, how to produce. Remember, your how to produce is just looking at how we use our factors of production. Now, we know land, labor, capital. We don't usually use the word enterprise. It should be entrepreneurship, but this is an American picture that I borrowed from the internet. So just remember, we don't talk enterprise, we talk entrepreneurship. But it's a good way to remind you why we are slightly different in South Africa versus what you may find on some of the other sites if you're looking at the internet. And we have to be able to move between those different terms. Make sure you can describe your factors of production, make sure you know how they're used, and then we use them in order to produce the goods and services that have been chosen by our consumers. Remember, what to produce is really determined through consumers, whereas how to produce is determined through our firms, our producers. And then a reminder that you've got different names. Land is also natural resources, labor, human resources. And then a little NB for you. Don't forget your division of labor, which is in your textbook, box 3-2. It's in chapter 3. Make sure you look at that because they like to ask that question every now and again. capital, man-made resources, your entrepreneurship, and then remember that we do not treat technology as a factor of production. Remember that, because you can easily fall into that trap. Your factors of production are land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. Technology really works together with all the other factors to make them more efficient. And then, of course, what I said to you earlier, money is not a factor of production, never, ever, ever. It is a medium of exchange. Please remember that. They will try and test you on that to see whether you've identified money incorrectly as a factor of production. Your for whom to produce, this section does not appear in the textbook, so we have to give you a little bit of information on that, and that is who will receive the goods that are produced in the economy, that is those people who are able to purchase them, and of course this raises what we call the question of distribution. Now some of you may not have done this because maybe some of your lecturers have followed strictly what's in the textbook, but it is important that you are able to give a brief answer on for whom to produce, and that's what I've given you here. So this is the distribution problem, and that is the distribution of income based on the distribution of factors of production. All right, so remember your factors of production, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, they all are sources of income. So on land, we receive rent, on labor, wages and salaries, on capital, interest, and on entrepreneurship, profit. So the distribution of those factors of production will determine how much income people are able to receive. And of course, this is why we call this the distribution problem. And often in society, not only in South Africa, but around the world, there will be calls for redistribution. And then they're talking about redistributing the income or the factors of production in society. All right. So make sure you know your returns on all of your factors of production. There they are. Let's just get to the next slide. There you go. Here is your natural resources, earn rent. Your labor earns salaries and wages. Your capital is interest, and your entrepreneurship earns profit. All right. So this is absolutely critical knowledge, ladies and gents. You've got to know it. You must be able to talk about your factors of production, your resources, and then you must also be able to talk about the returns or the cost of those resources, those factors of production. All right, we're going to go on break now. It is 12:56. We'll come back in about 10 minutes time. So that will give us just before 10 past 1. All right. So those of you who want to go and take a break, you're welcome to do so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zip back quickly to those first 10 slides, just so that whoever was struggling to get on board, at least you've got a quick chance to pick it up. I'm obviously not going to give it to you in detail. We'll just do a quick run through, and I don't want it to take us more than what have we got? We've got 10 minutes to do that. All right. So let's go back. All right, so I started off with obviously the intro revision for test 1, and then what we did was we went and had a look at what is required for the test. All right, so a reminder that learning unit 1, 2, and 3 are all required, which is chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. A reminder of the outcomes so that you have a look at those. Your learning unit 1 was where we began. Making sure that you know what we mean, all of these, scarcity, choice, opportunity, cost, and that's what we mentioned to you there. Make sure you can describe them, make sure you can define them wherever applicable, and that you can recognize them. Then we said, make sure you know the relationship between your key concepts. So your limited resources is your scarcity. Limited resources means limited goods and services can be produced, leads to choices, which lead to opportunity costs. Making sure you know opportunity cost is what we sacrifice, all right, what we give up. Being able to distinguish between your wants, your needs, demand, Looking once again at what is absolutely critical, ladies and gents, when you are using any descriptions, what you need to be aware of for your test one. Demand particularly, you need your ability and your willingness, those two key concepts. Looking at your PPC, remember it has different names, being able to describe your PPC and then being able to draw it, be able to take a scenario that they give you and then be able to represent that scenario with a very, very simple graph. The PPC is super simple, all right? Don't overcomplicate it. Just make sure you can use it to illustrate all of these different concepts that are required. And then what I did was I asked students to draw a PPC. I said, have a bash at it, see if you can draw it based on this information. And then we went on and we had a look at what would it look like. So we can produce either, notice the either or, all right, because that is telling you that those are the points or the intercept on your axes. So you can't produce the combination of these two. You can either produce 2,000 kgs of potatoes and that will be 0 beef, or you can produce 1,000 kgs of beef and that will be 0 potatoes. And then we gave you instructions, potatoes on the y-axis, beef on the x-axis, and then we went and we drew the graph. So there we had it. There was our intercept for our potatoes, and that implies that it's 0 beef. All right, that's what it means when you're on the axis. The other one of the products is at 0. So in this case, beef is at 0, potatoes at 2,000, and then when we want to go and do beef, potatoes is at 0, and beef is at 1,000. Now, folks, if you're struggling with this is not economics, all right? This is mathematics. This is your numeracy skills. And remember, VC students have been given the opportunity to test their numeracy skills. You've got that on your, you should have it on your ARC, and that gives you an opportunity to go and see, are my skills where they should be? And if they're not, there's a little, they've set up a numeracy support module that you can go through, but you don't have to use that module. You can go anywhere you like on the internet and check your numeracy skills. All right, that might be something you have to do, and it is something that we pick up with the graphs with students, because what happens is you can't read the graph and then you think it's economics fault, but it's not. It's your numeracy skills that you need to focus on, right? So then we went on to checking all of this information. Now, can you identify points that are attainable and efficient? They've got to be on your PPC. Now, those are rules. These are rules. But if you understand your PPC, you will be able to remember because it's obvious. But if you're struggling to understand the PPC, once again, because you struggle with graphs, then you need to learn it. And then you can apply it, all right? So any point on the PPC will always be efficient and attainable. Any point inside the PPC will be attainable but inefficient. And that is because you're not using all of your resources, all right? And then any point outside of your PPC is unattainable. These are things that you're going to have to learn. They're going to ask you questions on it in some or other way, and you need to be comfortable, all right? Then we go on to what I asked the students to have a look at. I said, go in and have a look at what is going to happen to your PPC now if you have any of these questions. And we identified where it would cause a shift and where it would cause a swivel. So shift means that both of your products are increasing or decreasing a lot. So your curve is actually shifting along both axes. And your swivel means that it's only going to be impacting on one sector or one product. All right, so make sure you know this. It's not difficult stuff, but you've got to practice it. Otherwise, you're not going to recognize it when you see it in the test. And then we said to you, remember that economic growth is the same as that one there. Economic resources increase. That will lead to economic growth in terms of illustrating it on the PPC. And then I said, watch out for this one, unemployment, because now we don't want shifts or swivels. We just want a point inside of the PPC. All right. And then I gave a little bit of a description. Let's go have a look. There we go. And I said, make sure you know the difference between your shift and your swivel. Now, your lecturers may not use these terms. They don't have to, and you don't even have to. But I do, because I find it gives the students clarity. It gives them something to actually remember, and then they're less likely to get confused between the difference between these two moves that you've got to be aware of. All right. So that took us through more than the first 10 slides, but hopefully all of those of you who came in a little bit late and only caught on, then you feel a little bit more comfortable. All right, let's see. I can take questions now. Let's have a look and see. Let's have a look at this. Can you explain how? Opportunity, yes, I'll go back and I'll do that. Bonola, let's just give her a message. All right, let me just reply to her quickly. All right, Baptista, I'm going to go back to your opportunity cost. Yep. Anyone not see the screen? Okay, so just a quick review there. There seem to be a couple of people who couldn't see the screen. I'm assuming you can hear me, but you can't see it. I can only imagine that what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go out and come back in, or it might be your connection. Because we do find that if you've got a bit of an intermittent connection, then you struggle, the slides struggle to come through to you. Sometimes it's a delay, and sometimes it's just it can't. So it could be your connections. And once again, please, those of you who are experiencing these problems, really important to send it through to your IT departments at some point so that they're aware and they can acknowledge that there are some of these issues that we have to deal with. Sorry about that. It's not anything I can do from my side. All right, let's go have a look at that opportunity cost situation. Let's go back. This is a nice graph to work with opportunity cost. So those of you who are still with me and want to, before we get back on to doing the actual revision, those of you who want to work with me are welcome to do so. Let's take a look at the opportunity cost for some of the moves along here. Just checking my posts quickly, and then we'll have a look at that. Good question. With any calculations? Oh, all right. Let me answer the question. Okay, Ms. Faber, any calculations, 2 decimal points. All right. Generally, but do pay attention to the specific instructions. Any calculations, we need 2 decimal points generally. That's the rule. Luanda, I see, says that they can't see the screen. Please, ladies and gents, just give me a thumbs up that if you can see the screen, just so that I can actually see how many are, or get an idea that some people are seeing the screen, some people not. It could be that my system's lost connection, so we need to, it doesn't tell me that it has, but just in case. It could be my side, so I'm just checking. All right, it should be okay now. Let's just double check. So it wasn't, and now it should be okay again. Okay, well done. Thank you. All right, thank you, guys and girls. All right. Now it should be fine. Just checking. Oh, I think I know what it is. I think it's got an hour schedule on it. I have an idea that Microsoft Teams might have an hour schedule. So what it does is it throws us out, and then we've got to come back in. So obviously it just threw off my screen, but it didn't throw us out completely. But thanks, folks. Luckily we picked it up. So now I can go and do the opportunity cost, because now we can all see the screen again. Brilliant. All right, so we're back. We've got another hour, so we should be all right. We might have to just go a little bit over 2 o'clock, if you can, but I won't. I won't take too long. I'll go quickly through learning unit 2, and then there we go. All right, so just having a quick look at opportunity cost for those of you who perhaps need to practice a calculation. I'm going to give you 2 tests. You can put your answers in on the Q&A. Let's go for the first one. Let's do a simple movement. So we're going to do a movement from point A to point B. All right, so if we moved from point A, so we were, as a community, we were producing 50 pillows and 0 blankets, and then we decide, we need both. So what we do is we go and say we're going to move from A to B, which means at B, we're going to produce 47 pillows and we're going to produce 1 blanket. Please tell me, what is my opportunity cost? So from A to B, what is my opportunity cost? Just waiting for those of you who might be responding. Delay is very irritating, I must say, but don't you stress about it. It's just Teams. Brilliant. Well done, those of you who answered. You are correct. It is the difference between 50 and 47, and you gave the answer in full, which was great. You said it was 3 pillows. Often students will just write down the number 3, and you're going to get half the marks. All right, you've got to be specific. So in this particular case, it was 3 pillows, absolutely. But let's go and check you somewhere else, because sometimes reading on the one axis is fine. But as soon as we go and read on the other axis, then students get a bit confused. Let's go and have a look at if we move from E to D. What happens if we move from E to D? What is my opportunity cost now? You can tell me again. So now we move from E to D. What is my opportunity cost? Waiting for your answers. Remember, we're going from E to D. Ah, 1 blanket, you're right, but be careful. Somebody said 1 pillow. I'm not sure where you were going with that one, but be careful, because it's not 1 pillow, it is 1 blanket. All right, let's check some of the others quickly. 1 blanket, 1 blanket, 1 blanket. Oh, Lauren, no, not 15 pillows, because what you were doing then is you were reading off your pillows axis and not off your blankets. All right, remember that. You've got to look at what you're giving up. So let's just look at that again. At E, we had 20 pillows. There's our 20 pillows at E and 4 blankets. Then we move from E to D. What happens now is we only have 3 blankets. We've sacrificed 1 blanket, and we have now 35 pillows. But we're not interested in the pillows. We're interested in what we have sacrificed. So please, folks, just be careful. Very typical mistake to make. We tend to look at what we gain, and then we use that as opportunity cost. But opportunity cost must be what we give up. All right. All right, I'm going to zip through quickly again back to where we need to be. I'm hoping that we've at least been able to help a few of you with that opportunity cost story, and that you're now all on board with us where we are. So just bear with me while we get back to where we need to be. Okay, that's where we finished off. And we're now going to go quickly have a look at how we answer these main economic questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. How do we actually answer them? And we learn that the answer to those questions depends on the mechanism or the economic system that is in place. Now, it's pure theory, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because this is stuff you just have to learn. There's very little to understand here. It's all about just studying the information that you've either been given by your lecturer or studying the stuff from the textbook. All right. So you've got to know your basic systems, which are your traditional command market, and then know that your mixed system is a combination of all three. All right, please don't confuse that. Mixed is not one of your basics. Mixed is a combination of elements of all three of the basic systems. Often when we talk about mixed, one of the key ingredients that makes it mixed is the level of government intervention. So do be sure that you're comfortable with that concept. We tend to ignore the traditional a bit because traditional is in every single economy, but it doesn't have such an amazing impact on most modern economies. It has a very big impact, though, on some of your more traditional, older school type economies. But we usually look at the combination between command and market in a little bit more detail. All right. And then what we've got here is we've got the key points. So what I'm doing is I'm just giving you key points on each of them. Make sure you know that. So that if we asked you to describe the traditional system for 4 marks, you'd have enough information to be able to tell us what is the traditional system. And that's once again, when I say study this smart, make sure that what you've done is you've identified some of the key characteristics in each of these systems. You will then be able to recognize the questions, and you'll also be able to give us the information that we need in an answer. All right. So your key points for your traditional system, then your key points for your command system. And please don't just talk government with command system. When you talk command system, remember it's a central authority. It can and is often the government, but it doesn't have to be. So it's important for us to remember that it's not just controlled by government. Usually you use the term central authority, and then you can say, for example, by the government. All right. Your market system, folks, is super important because your market system is what we operate in. So there are going to be questions from your market system. You need to be comfortable with it. And every single thing you see on this screen is important. All right. It could be questions from any one of these. Please make sure you can answer them. You're likely to get at least one of these questions. What is a market? What is a market system? What are the conditions that we need for a market to exist? Very specific. You can't get creative here. All right. This is very specific information taken from the textbook. Can you explain why market prices are signals? Also explains it in the textbook, very clear. And then often called a capitalist system. In other words, the market system is called a capitalist system. Can you tell us why? Also, very clearly explained in the textbook. Just be sure that you've paid attention to it. I anticipate mostly that once you've looked at it once, you'll be absolutely fine. You'll be able to answer that question. But if you haven't looked at it, you may be thrown in the test. All right. So do be sure you go back to that and you have a look at each of those in the textbook. Some other questions from chapter 2 that are important. Which economic system is applicable to South Africa? Explain why. You should be able to tell me it's a mixed system, and you must be able to tell us why. Once again, do not go and try and learn everything in the textbook off by heart. Just go and see, can I explain why South Africa is a mixed system? Make sure you've got like maybe 5 points that you can put in there. And of course, one of your key points is going to be a mixed system has elements of all three. that's already going to give you a mark. So one, identifying that South Africa has a mixed system, and two, being able to tell us what is a mixed system is already going to get you some marks. And then be able to explain the situation relevant to South Africa that has or identifies it as a mixed system. Be able to differentiate between your market economy and capitalism. That I think is on page 37 or thereabouts in the textbook, very clear. Once you've looked at it, you should be able to do that. And then again, what are the conditions that must exist for there to be a market? Please make sure, sorry, let's just go back. Please make sure that you know those conditions. I think there's 5 of them. Be sure you can give them accurately. All right, so that is a watch out situation. Then we go on to chapter 3. Remember, still learning unit 2, but chapter 3, and this is your circular flow of production, income, and spending. And here we want to be sure that you identify the terminology. The flow diagrams, folks, are prescribed and they can be asked. So they can ask you to draw them. They very rarely do. But what they do on occasion do is they give you the actual diagram and then ask you to label or identify. Please do not try and learn them off by heart, rather understand them. Because if you understand the flows, you will be fine. You'll be able to answer all the questions. So that's what our focus is going to be on, is do you understand the terminology? Do you know what they're asking? And then would you be able to give the answers required? A lot of the stuff you know, it's just a case of recognizing what they're actually asking. So your first thing is your production flow, your spending flow, your income flow, making sure that you can describe each of them. What do we mean by production, income, and spending? Now, check yourself. Do not assume that you automatically know. Your production, factors of production. That's what they're talking about. Who owns them? Who sells them? Who buys them? Make sure you know that. Your income. What is your income? It is the returns on your factors of production. On land, on labor, on capital, on entrepreneurship. We've looked at that already. You already know that. Make sure you can link them correctly and you can identify your sources of income. Your spending. Who spends in the economy? That is your participants, your households, your firms, your government, your foreign sector. That's how this little story works. You cannot make up your own story. It's very specific and it's very clear how you must learn it in Learning Unit 2 or Chapter 3. All right. Here are your sources of production. This is your production flow. These are your factors of production. And that is your land, your labor, your capital, your entrepreneurship. And once again, I alert you to the division of labor. Here's a question that has appeared before in many tests. List 4 advantages of the division of labor. All right, so important for you to be able to do that. Make sure you have looked at it. It is in the textbook, box 3-2. Very clear, nothing difficult, but you may not know it if you haven't looked at it. Your sources of income, that is your remuneration or your rewards for your factors of production. Land, rent, labor, wages and salaries, capital, interest, entrepreneurship, profit. Super clear? Learn it. Know it, be able to give it in that test. All right. And then your sources of spending, that is your participants, your households. Make sure you can describe your households, give a little bit of story. And then a very, very important assumption that we make when we are studying this economic circular flow model, and that is that the households own all the factors of production. All right, so a really important assumption. Remember, assumptions are not facts. Assumptions are something that we do to make a model simple and easy to understand. It does not have to be a true fact, but you have to learn it as an assumption. Then your firms, they employ the factors of production or they use the factors of production to produce goods and services. They buy those factors of production from our households. And then remember, firms, we refer to capital formation, investment. Those are words or terms that you could be tested on. Make sure that you're comfortable with that. And then your government, very brief description of government, very brief description of foreign sector, because these are, in fact, for macroeconomics. This is what you study in second semester, is government in detail, and foreign sector in detail. You don't have to know the details for microeconomics. You just got to be able to give a brief description. Government does this, foreign sector does this. All right. Which brings us to your markets, your key or major markets in your main markets, your goods market and your factor market. Make sure you can describe them. Remember, a market is where there are buyers and sellers. Don't only give us one side of the market. Market has to be both for your goods market and your factor market. Goods market, we buy and sell goods and services. Factor market, we buy and sell factors of production. And then remember your financial market, and this acts as an intermediary or a link between your savings and investment. All right, that's pretty much it for your markets. But just remember that your goods and your factor market are your two main markets.